Hello lovely people, welcome to another video, another monthly films watch. I've been lucky enough to watch some great films in April. So I wanted to share with you which films I would recommend, which films I would avoid, and what I thought of the films overall. So let's get going, shall we? And we start off with Ralph Breaks the Internet, the sequel to Wreck-It Ralph, which is a film that I really enjoyed last month. The sequel isn't quite as good as you'd expect, but it still has a lot of charm. Ralph's best friend Glitch becomes homeless after her game breaks. In search of a replacement part, they go exploring the scary realms of the internet. It's another cute and likeable adventure with plenty of in-jokes about the perils and pitfalls of social media. Ironically though, the more modern references will no doubt age this sequel quicker than the classic gaming references of the first. Ralph Breaks the Internet is still a lot of fun, but suffers like so many sequels from the law of diminishing returns. It's watchable, entertaining, but inferior to its predecessor, and I'd probably give that an average 2.5 out of 5. A classic from 1938 next, we have Bringing Up Baby. An awkward scientist, played by Cary Grant, keeps blundering into a provocative, fast-talking heiress, Katharine Hepburn, and the sparks fly as they are both repelled and drawn to each other. Before long, they are joined by a rather unwelcome guest, her pet baby, the leopard. Grant and Hepburn have wonderful chemistry and deliver the quick-fire wit with such aplomb that you can't take your eyes off the screen. Woody Allen was clearly taking note with this when he made comedy classics like Annie Hall, which relies on a similar style of bumbling social inadequacy between its main characters. Some will find the ferocious back and forth and 1930s screwball comedy a bit irritating, and I did find that Bringing Up Baby outstayed its welcome after the first hour and descended into rather annoying silliness. But for the most part, I did love the characters and I found the interplay between them highly entertaining, and I'd give that 3 out of 5. From the ridiculous to the sublime next, we have from 1982, Sophie's Choice. Stingo, a young writer from the South, moves into an old house in Brooklyn where he meets eccentric neighbour Sophie and Nathan. A friendship blossoms between the three, but it's marred by Nathan's frequent verbally abusive outbursts and Sophie's hiding of a dreadful secret. Meryl Streep gives one of her defining performances in Sophie's Choice as a Polish Holocaust survivor, showcasing a seemingly effortless shift between English, Polish and German as she recounts her tragic tale. The rest of the cast are also excellent, if unpleasant in their roles, but the three as a crowd dynamic I found to be uncomfortable watching at times. The structure of the film is quite inconsistent as well. Most people will understandably remember the flashback to the harrowing and cruel choice that Sophie must make to save herself and one of her children from the gas chambers in Auschwitz. Yet the children are only mentioned in the last half an hour or two of a 2-hour film, which has mostly concentrated on Stingo's growing love for Sophie and Nathan's horrendous treatment of her. It's certainly well made and a very memorable film with great performances. The way in which the incredible cruelty and inhumanity of the Nazis is individualised reminded me a little bit of the way Spielberg made genocide personal with his girl in the red jacket technique in Schindler's List. And the depiction of the atrocities of the concentration camps in Sophie's Choice will leave a similarly nasty taste in your mouth. I gave Sophie's Choice 3 out of 5. Slightly disappointing considering how much I'd heard about the film. It is a good film, but not one I would perhaps return to very often. I had a fun day having a James Bond marathon, and there were, I think, 4 films in all that I rewatched from different Bonds, starting with From Russia with Love, 1963, Sean Connery film, the second film of the series. Secret criminal organisation Spectre is playing the Russians and the British off against each other and gaining power through the chaos that caused. Bond must find and retrieve a Russian defector, but is it all part of Spectre's trap to avenge Dr. No? Sandwiched in between the iconic debut of Dr. No and arguably the quintessential Bond film Goldfinger, From Russia with Love is often wrongfully overlooked. If you are after a superb and straightforward spy film, From Russia with Love is one of the finest. But if you're looking for the camper side of Bond with all the bells and whistles, you might find it all a bit dry. The casting is strong, and in particular, Robert Shaw is suitably imposing as the enemy. A very underrated Bond film in my eyes. And I have given that 3.5 stars. Then it was on to Roger, probably my favourite Bond, on The Spy Who Loved Me, 1977. A jointly owned British-Russian submarine carrying nuclear warheads disappears. In an attempt to prevent World War III, James Bond teams up with a Russian agent whose lover he has inconveniently killed in Austria to get to the bottom of the mystery. The Spy Who Loved Me has just the right balance for me of spy action and ostentatious theatrics to bolster it high in the series. Favourite Bond tropes such as a captivating pre-credits scene, notable villains including Jaws making his debut, and inventive gadget cars make this one of the most memorable Bond films, with Roger Moore arguably giving his peak performance in the role, and I've given it 5 out of 5. And then I watched the Brosnan film Tomorrow Never Dies from 1997. A crazed media mogul commits terrorist acts to create a monopoly on the news. GoldenEye was such a shot in the arm for the series that it was impossible to follow, and Tomorrow Never Dies is a much better Bond film than it is remembered as a result. The techno-terrorist plot and reliance on new technology, which made Tomorrow Never Dies ahead of its time, has the effect of dating it poorly now. By the 90s, the double entendres also seem a bit dated and cringeworthy. However, the allegory of the corruption of media tycoons is as relevant now as it ever was, and Tomorrow Never Dies is suitably big and noisy in making this point. Jonathan Pryce, although a great actor, makes for an underwhelming Bond villain, and the style is veering towards the ridiculous excesses the series will reach by Die Another Day. But for the most part, Brosnan's era is still in fine form on his second outing, and I've given that a fairly mediocre 2.5 stars. And finishing off the Bond marathon, we have the most latest Bond film at this time of recording, No Time to Die from 2021. Bond is pulled out of retirement for one last mission to stop a crazed megalomaniac who, with the unwilling help of MI6, has discovered the power over life and death. Daniel Craig bows out after one of the most impressive runs as the perennial secret agent, with a respectable but mixed swan song. There are more than a few nods to the similarly inconsistent On Her Majesty's Secret Service throughout this film, and this is fitting for a film that will no doubt divide the fandom in the same fashion. Craig is brilliant as always, and there are some wonderfully directed set pieces set in gorgeously shot locations, but from the dull theme tune to the baggage of previous film arcs weighing it down, No Time to Die is denied its own unique character. Not to mention the usually excellent Rami Malek, who feels a little bit wasted as the little seen and rather one-dimensional villain here. No Time to Die is an undeniably solid Bond film, but it pulls in so many directions, such as a love story, a next-generation superhero film, a throwback to the silliness of some of the earlier films, that it's not just the seismic shifting ending that will leave viewers scratching their heads. I've given that film 3 out of 5 stars. I got to check out a Bowie promotional film from before he was super famous, Love You Till Tuesday from 1969. It's difficult to believe that Bowie didn't arrive as a fully fledged alien pop phenomenon, singing Starman on Top of the Pops in 1972, but the chameleon of rock had already been trying on different guises for years before settling on the one that would become so iconic. Back in 1969, a young Bowie was channeling Anthony Newley and presenting himself as a vaudevillian, whimsical pop star with a penchant for mime and fairy tale songs. It's a stark contrast from how cool he would go on to be just 3 years later, and for the uninitiated, Love You Till Tuesday, a video compilation promo, will make for painful watching. Even as a lifelong Bowie fan and someone who actually likes some of these earlier tunes, it was still a bit of a slog, I have to admit. It's worth a watch for an early different musical version and video for Space Oddity, but even the most diehard fans will find this little more than a curio and will count their blessings that he moved away onto more successful characters and musical ideas shortly after Love You Till Tuesday. I've given it 1 star out of 5. A documentary next, we have Lynch Oz from 2022 coming out just last year. It's a documentary examining the influential 1939's Wizard of Oz and the influence it may well have had on David Lynch's work. The Wizard of Oz is easily one of my favourite films of all time, and David Lynch is one of my favourite directors, so I was fascinated to see this comparison of the two. Lynch Oz is presented in several well-researched and posited essays, but for all its cleverness, it is more conjecture and philosophy than it is a proven connection, with lots of maybe he thinks this and probably he does that approach. So it feels a bit cerebral at times. It overstates its point and outstays its welcome. But it's still thought-provoking and it's still worth a watch, especially if you're a fan of either David Lynch or Wizard of Oz, and I've given it 3 out of 5 stars. Another recent documentary, Lewis Capaldi, How I'm Feeling Now, from this year, 2023. It's an intimate documentary film about the wonderfully down-to-earth Lewis Capaldi and his rise to fame. He talks candidly about his struggle with mental health, his Tourette's and imposter syndromes, with his own brand of humour and humility. He's such a likeable guy that regardless of whether you like his music or not, you can't help but root for him. And this is a really interesting documentary, which I've given 4 out of 5 stars. Back to 2001 for the heist film Ocean's 11. Mr. Ocean, George Clooney, assembles a team of criminal minds to plan an impossible job on a range of casinos. An all-star cast lead this super cool ensemble heist movie, a remake of the Rat Pack classic. A who's who of ones to watch in the early noughties, slick, stylised and smooth with that kind of throwback 70s feel popularised by Tarantino. It's not really my kind of film, but if it's yours, it's a well-made example of the genre, if you can deal with Don Cheadle's Dick Van Dyke approach to the English accent, of course. I've given it 3 out of 5 stars. Worth a watch. Ocean's 11 from 2001. Not so much worth a watch is the more recent Murder Mystery 2 from 2023, which I've only given half a star, which is one of my worst ratings, I think, ever. This wasn't a movie that I chose myself, but if I had have done, I would have been deeply disappointed. A private detective couple attend a friend, the Maharaja's wedding in India, where he's kidnapped and must get to the bottom of this mystery. I don't want to be one of those insufferable film snob types, but this really had no redeeming features for me. I didn't laugh once, I had zero connection with the characters, and the plot was paper thin. Why was this film even made? I've no idea. I haven't seen the first one and I have no desire to go back and watch it after seeing Murder Mystery 2. Half a star. A film I do enjoy returning to, however, is Carry On Doctor from 1967. The goings-on of a cast of characters in a 1960s hospital. Of course, by modern standards, the humour of the Carry On films is extremely dated and dubious, relying on tired cliches and sexist jokes. However, if you can switch off that part of your brain and enjoy it for what it is, a bawdy and often hilarious dose of seaside postcard humour, there's a lot to enjoy in this highlight from the series. And I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Big fan of Carry On Doctor. From 2003, I watched House of Sand and Fog. A woman is erroneously kicked out of her house by the council and a new Iranian family buy it as an investment property. Sparks fly between them as she tries to get her house back, leading to a war that will end in tragedy. Both Jennifer Connelly and Ben Kingsley have so much screen presence that it's hard to take your eyes off them. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the direction of House of Sand and Fog, which felt cold, dry and a little bit empty at times to me. It's beautifully acted and there's some captivating scenes, but it's lacking somewhat in entertainment value and it didn't do it for me as much as I would have liked, and I've given it 2.5 out of 5. I'm enjoying working through the old Muppets films at the moment and got into the second one From 1981, The Great Muppet Caper. Kermit and the gang find themselves embroiled in the mystery of a jewel heist. The second and possibly weakest of the main three Jim Henson Muppet films still has a lot to offer for fans young and old. The music's great, the jokes are witty, and the cameos come thick and fast again. Unlike the movies that bookend it, the Muppets act out a story rather than live through their own, and it's a fairly run-of-the-mill crime caper. But we're not here for the plot, we're here for the whole great comedy shtick, and The Great Muppet Caper certainly has a lot of that to give. I've given it 3 out of 5 stars. 2 more to go, and I don't think you could get any more different from The Great Muppets Caper to Anemic Cinema from 1926, an experimental art film. Marcel Duchamp's experimental film has the feel of a psychic hypnosis video with all its twirling interlinked circles. It's certainly impressive and highly influential for its time. It could easily pass as a Warholian art film from 40 years in its future. Obviously, this is more of an experimental study and piece of art than any kind of narrative film, so it's more extraordinary than enjoyable, I would say, and I've given it 3 out of 5 stars. And the last film I checked out in April 2023 was another Carry On film, Carry On Abroad from 1972, one of my all-time favourite from the series. The Carry On team are off to Ellsbells for a holiday in a half-built hotel. The jokes come thick and fast, and the characters are memorable in one of my all-time favourites from the series, and I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. There we are, those are all the films I checked out in April. I'd love to hear what you've been watching recently and any movie recommendations you'd like to drop in the comments below. Thanks as always for watching, and take care.